the ego is frequently portrayed as the rival, the thing that we need to do battle with, exert control over, or even eradicate in order to realize our full potential. However, what if everything that we have been told about the ego happens to be missing a crucial piece of the puzzle? What if the ego is not the enemy at all, but rather an essential component of our development, one that has really been directing us throughout our whole existence, even in the most tumultuous phases of our evolution? It is possible that this twist will contradict everything that you believed you know. Consequently, what if the exact thing that we have been fighting against is actually guiding us to something that is more significant? To get a better grasp of the ego, its function in our development, and the ways in which, in the larger scheme of things, it might well be vital to our path, let's delve deeper into this topic. Despite the fact that the ego may appear to be fairly mad from a certain point of view, when viewed from a more elevated vantage point, it is nothing more than a component of the evolutionary process of the species. This is a stage in the evolution process, and as we go closer to the next stage in the evolution process, we are starting to realize that the ego has fully outlived its purpose. On the other hand, it did have some practical applications, and we are just now starting to see that it is completely absurd because we are getting closer to the next stage in the evolution of humans. Aside from the extremely rare great masters, nobody was able to recognize that the ego was completely insane in the past. It was already stated by the Buddha that it is a delusion. Although Jesus said the words, "Deny thyself," which might be translated as, "recognize the unreality of the ego," not many people believed what they were saying. In a sense, they were a type of foreshadowing to the subsequent step. They were pointing to it before it truly became a genuine awakening on the world. As a result, the ego appears to be completely nonsensical when viewed from our current vantage point, which is because we are at the conclusion of one stage of evolution. This is because the ego has caused a great deal of chaos in the past, but when viewed from a more elevated vantage point, it is a component of the progression of humanity. Without it, there would be no enlightenment or waking in the end. Without it, there would be no awakening. Therefore, it is not a problem. You are able to see how you had to go through the struggles of ignorance in your own life by looking at your own life. I am not referring to ignorance in the sense of a lack of education. Rather, I am referring to spiritual ignorance, which is the state of not recognizing who you are at your core and committing a great deal of errors based on the mistaken identification of your illusory ego. You are now able to see it, and you were required to go through it. Every single one of us did. It is quite conceivable that there was a time when members of mankind did not yet possess an ego. It is possible that this is reflected in the myth of the Golden Age, which can be seen in a variety of different cultures that did not even have any touch with one another. When humans lived in harmony with each other and with nature, and life was easy, and that myth speaks to perhaps the fact that a long, long time ago, humans lived in one instant, in a sense of oneness with nature and their surrounds, and the ego hadn't developed yet. It is possible that this occurred at a later time, and the memory of it has persisted as the myth of the Golden Age, which is of course referred to as paradise in the Old Testament. In the myth of the Golden Age, when life was simple and uncomplicated, something happened, which you may refer to as the fall, or whatever you choose to call it. This is just one component of the narrative. It took place, and then the ugly elements entered the picture. It is a well-known fact that this event marked the beginning of the human capacity to think, which was first a miraculous realization. The thought occurred all of a sudden. The assertion is being made by a number of anthropologists, and I believe that they are correct. When humans first started thinking, they were taken aback, and they believed that a deity was speaking to them in their heads. This led them to believe that they couldn't possibly be thinking. The creation of language was a component of the abrupt emergence of thought, which was a contributing factor. Conversations began to take place in people's thoughts, and they asked, "Who's talking?" And then they put it into action, frequently when a concept occurred to them. And then they carried it out. "Kill this man." The enemy, the other tribe, they are the enemy, they are not human, the voice was telling them. Killed this man in order to protect the other tribe. Therefore, the voice in the head took that into consideration. Because it made many things possible that would not have been possible without it. It was a miracle. One of these things was the emergence of certain knowledge. You had the ability to transfer knowledge, and without that, civilization as we know it now would not have been possible. After the transmission of knowledge, architecture, and subsequently philosophy, there are many different sorts of transmissions of knowledge. As a result of all of these things, conceptual knowledge is emerging, which is a marvelous and peculiar occurrence. Afterward, over the course of several millennia, the voice became so prevalent that it dominated people's perception of who they were as individuals. For a considerable amount of time, most likely after the development of thinking, human beings continued to possess a sense of rootedness in being, the inherent sense of rootedness that was present in the core of their being. As time went on, over the course of millennia, they gradually became more and more sucked into the mode of thinking brain, and eventually their entire sense of identity was no longer founded in the depths of their existence, but rather in the voice that was in their head. This is how they got there, but it opened the door to a lot of opportunities. Now, the next phase in the evolution is a return to the state that existed before the ego. However, this time with the additional dimension of consciously recognizing your connectivity with the one entity. It was a natural level of connectedness, in contrast to the previous situation in which they were connected with the one without even being aware of it. On the other hand, as we make our way back to the ego that lies beyond the ego, we are now consciously returning to the one, which is the next level. That is not a step in the wrong direction. In a sense, we are returning to the golden age, as one might nearly say, but knowing that this is not the case. This is, of course, reflected in the ancient tale that is included in the Bible and is referred to as the prodigal son. As soon as the son leaves his father's house, he tells his father, "Give me your inheritance," and then he travels to a faraway nation where he wastes all of his wealth and eventually becomes homeless. The message is then delivered by the father, who sends a messenger to deliver the message, which is as follows: "Come back home. Come back to me." As time goes on, the son starts to regain his sense of identity, and he eventually returns to the house where his father resides. According to the tale, he is loved more profoundly than he was in the past. There is a more profound, after you have lost it, you will then come back to it. Despite the fact that you never truly lose it completely, you can't, or you wouldn't even exist. You do lose it. And then when you return to it, there is an additional depth to it, a depth of understanding. That is the destination that we are supposed to reach. Because of this, once we come to terms with the fact that the ego was a necessary component of the journey, we are genuinely thankful to it. It means the world to me if you could show your appreciation by liking the video, leaving a comment that says, "Now," to indicate the level of involvement you have with the content, and sharing this information with someone who could benefit from it if you find it useful. If you are seeking for additional films that will assist you in being a better person, becoming more self-aware, and making true connections with the people around you, then you should subscribe to our channel.